If you're a service business owner or a coach, then you've probably been sold on the narrative that short form content is going to scale your business. So then you ended up investing a bunch of time and money into systematizing the content creation process, only to be met with having a bunch of unqualified leads and having to babysit a bunch of overseas freelancers, all for content that doesn't produce any real revenue. And as a video production and marketing agency owner who has generated millions of dollars for my clients, I can tell you from experience that short form content is probably one of the most expensive and lowest ROI generating approaches to marketing your business. And in this video today, I'm going to be sharing with you how you can approach it just slightly differently so that you can actually start generating revenue and preserve your sanity. So before I get into the video, I want to define what I mean by short form content just for the context of this video. So whenever I'm talking about short form content, I basically mean like the talking head videos that you see on Instagram that are typically from like service business owners or coaches that are basically giving value information, where they're basically giving like tips or advice or just information about what it is that they do. So what exactly is the narrative around short form content? So the narrative of it is that it's very cheap, meaning they're cheap to produce. Usually what you'll end up doing is you'll film a bunch of these videos and then you'll hire an overseas freelancer off of like Upwork or Fiverr to basically edit the video for you. And the idea is that if you were to give them a bulk of content, like let's say, for example, a standard approach is 30 reels, so 1 reel a day. So you would basically send that to an overseas editor, and then you end up paying them like $10 a video, maybe even like $15 a video. It all depends on the editor that you actually get, but generally speaking, these videos are typically going to live within this price range. Some can even go as low as like $5. And then the idea is that when you actually get the content, then you post it every day. You post it every day for a month. And then the whole goal of that is for one of them to eventually go viral. And from one of the reels going viral, that is supposed to basically help you with growing your social media presence and basically getting you a whole bunch of leads through organic content. And while you're in the process of posting all of the content, then you basically repeat the process. So while the 30 reels are being posted, you're going to be creating 30 more, and then you basically just have this flywheel of content being made and produced and posted. So I do want to talk about, at least from my experience, what the actual truth of this is. And I want to give you some context. When I first started getting a little bit more serious about doing marketing for my own business, this is when I started to basically do ads, and then I was trying to level up my social media presence by posting this types of content. So I ended up doing this exact same approach that I'm telling you, and I'm just telling this to you from my own personal experience. And basically, what I kind of learned to be true is that on a surface level, yes, when you're paying like $10, when you're paying like $5, $10, $15 a video or so, then that's technically not that much. And then if you were to actually create the content in bulk, then yes, that's where the cost is going to actually be going up. So very standard like economics of creating the short form content, right? You make like if you made like 30 reels for $10, then that's going to be like $300. So not that huge of an investment at the end of the day. But one of the things that I was personally experiencing is that when you're hiring the editors that are charging like anywhere from like $5 or $15 or whatever to $20, like a lot of times, because the only reason why people are going to be charging this low is because it's basically editors from third world countries where this kind of money actually goes a little bit further for them. If someone in the US were to be charging these rates, it would be like absolutely insane because there's no way that they would be able to make any sort of livable income off of charging that little for a video. So if you were to hire somebody who is from the US, then they're typically going to be charging like, I don't know, anywhere from like even $75 to 150 bucks or so for even like a good edit is probably going to be pretty standard. So when you're creating content in bulk, that just doesn't really make financial sense to actually do. So you would actually opt for the overseas editors. So where the point that I'm trying to make here is that while it is cheap, and then when you do it in bulk, kind of like a wholesale kind of approach to creating the content, yes, it is cheap, but the quality of the work is going to be dramatically lower. And what I mean by dramatically lower is that there's going to be like a language barrier, there's like a cultural barrier, communication issues like pretty much happen all the time. So even though I can communicate with them in English, and they're not really the best types of communicators. And I found this to be like the case maybe like 99% of the time, where they were not very good communicators. They would always tell you, yes, I understand, even though they realistically didn't. They don't necessarily follow directions all the time. And then the biggest issue is that the ones that do follow your direction, they will just follow the direction to a T. There's not going to be any sort of creativity or any sort of working around issues or just thinking through and problem solving things. They are only going to follow directions exactly as you tell them. So I was constantly finding myself having to go back and basically tell them, I need you to fix this or fix that. And then the nature of video editing is sometimes when you change one thing, there's sometimes you have to change other things just to make the video flow. It's something that they didn't necessarily like follow along with. So yes, while you are saving money by hiring like overseas people, you do need to keep in mind that you have to invest a heavy amount of time into actually finding the right person that can actually follow directions and not basically waste your time having to get their work corrected. So the point that I'm trying to make is, while it is cheap, you are going to be making up for the cost by spending a lot of time correcting things. And then another issue that I actually ended up running into is that it's very common that these editors, especially the ones that are charging higher rates, like even if they're overseas and they're charging like $50 plus, then you'd probably think to yourself, oh, I'm paying 50 bucks. Maybe this is going to be like higher quality. And in some cases it is, but from my own personal experience, I was just kind of finding that the people that are charging this much, they ended up just being agencies. And the reason why that can potentially be an issue for you is because while you are paying the higher price tag, what you end up actually getting is these agencies are technically just hiring the same cheaper labor like that costs this, so that they can actually keep the profit margin that they're actually charging. And there's nothing wrong with that. Like, that's just normal actual business and how you would approach it. But what I was finding kind of frustrating is when I was actually trying to hire, when I was thinking to myself, I'm going to get higher quality based off of this price tag, really what I was getting was the exact same quality of work as the $5 to $20 editor, as the $5 to $20 editors, because the agencies were hiring them. And then a lot of times on these freelance sites, you can actually see like how busy that the freelancer actually is. And if you see that they have a bunch of work in the queue, you have to kind of think to yourself, there's no way that this person is going to be able to pump out all of that content just on their own. Editing by itself can take a few hours just for one video, depending on how complex you get it. So it makes sense that they have to approach it this way, to where they have to hire like the cheaper editors. So it doesn't really matter what you end up doing. You're just going to end up getting this quality of work like pretty much every time, unless you try to go through the process of finding somebody that charges a little bit more, but is actually just a freelancer. They're not an agency. But at the end of the day, you are a busy business owner, and this isn't something where you're going to have the most bandwidth in the world to actually invest time into doing. So the next thing that I wanted to talk about in this is actually the quality of the leads. So the idea, right, is that you create this bulk of content. you post it every day, and then eventually one of them is going to go viral, or you get, or at the very least, you generate a few hundred views like every video, and then you progressively grow more followers, which means you're going to get more potential eyeballs and leads into your business. So that works well in theory, but what I've personally found in practice is that when you rely solely on like Instagram or Instagram's organic algorithm, one of the things that it realistically just ends up doing is it just casts out this very large net. And it's basically just from your actual post, it's going to be prioritizing views. So wherever it can basically get the most views, that's exactly what it's going to actually prioritize. And then what you're expected to do from this is basically from this sea of people that have eyes on your content, you have to figure out which one of these people is actually going to be a qualified lead for you. And all of these people here, they're going to be potentially like going into your funnels. They can be downloading your lead magnets. They could be going on your website, checking out your offers and checking out more of your content. But with the organic algorithm, it doesn't necessarily pay attention to exactly who's going to be a qualified lead. It's basically just prioritizing who is going to actually watch this video. So that's going to be a potential problem for your business, because if you have this huge like influx of people coming into your business and none of them are actually qualified, you're basically just getting like really poor quality traffic. And then there's really only going to be a small percentage of people from here that are actually qualified to be a client of your service. And some people might even be thinking like, oh, well, isn't that good? Like, isn't that something that I would want to do? It's like you would want a whole bunch of people coming in and then eventually like just talking through all of them and weeding them out through like sales calls or surveys and et cetera, to find the most qualified ones. And while yes, that is very true, you also kind of have to consider your own personal bandwidth or your team's bandwidth. So like, let's say, for example, all of these people were actually booking in calls or consultations or sales calls, whatever, with your team, and they were actually all unqualified. That is going to result in your sales team speaking to a bunch of unqualified people very regularly, and then not as much time talking to the people that are actually valuable to your business. And you kind of just have to think to yourself on the trade-off. It's like, would you rather have a huge volume of unqualified leads that you have to talk to, or would you rather have a smaller amount of people coming in, but a majority of them are more qualified? That's something from my experience that organic content isn't necessarily as strong in. And then the last thing that I want to talk about is the shelf life of this content. So with Instagram, it basically just prioritizes that you produce content in bulk and that you post all the time. And so many people run into this issue whenever they're trying to create social media content, is they just have this overwhelm and stress of having to create so many different pieces of content every day. And then if you are doing the whole short form content approach where you're creating 30 reels a month, and then you were to do that every single month, like you're spending all of this time and resources to be creating all of this content just for it to eventually be irrelevant within the next like 2 days. So the investment into like this content is unless it actually performed within a couple day time frame, it ended up just kind of just being a waste of money in a sense. And then you just have to basically just be on this constant grind of creating all of this content. And it's just a recipe for basically burning out whoever it is that is actually making the content. In the long run, it's just not the most practical thing. And then on top of that, actually tracking an ROI from the actual content is, I don't even necessarily really know how you would track analytics or sales report or the sales of actual organic content. You'd probably have to use like ManyChat or something. I've never really personally used that too much, so I'm not going to actually talk too much on that. But essentially, you're just on this never-ending hamster wheel of creating all this short-form content, and it's just an easy way to stress yourself out. And then on top of that, like And on top of that, like I was saying before, you're basically just generating all of this low quality traffic. So now that I'm done, being a negative Nancy, like, what do you do instead? What do I do instead? I can't spell. I'm not against short form content. I just don't necessarily think that approaching it in the way that people are typically taught is really a long. It's not exactly the best long-term strategy. So if you were to create short form content, what I would personally do is the amount of time that it would actually take to produce all of that content. I think you can take that budget and then just produce a smaller amount of content. Let's say even like 5 of them, and then invest the rest of the money into ads. So when I say ads, I mean meta ads. So Instagram and Facebook. So the reason why that I personally believe that this is a lot more valuable and beneficial and just overall better for your budget is because you actually get a lot more clearer data back on your content. So how Meta actually works and the whole ad platform as a whole is it'll take all of this content that you put and then it'll just send to whoever it thinks that the ad is actually going to be relevant to. So, and for those of you who aren't very familiar with Meta ads, like as it currently works at the time that I'm recording this, there's a new update out called Andromeda. And basically, long story short, the way that Andromeda and Meta's algorithm targets the audience is it targets it by the creatives. So if I made business content and ran ads on that, then Meta is going to be able to look at that content and know, okay, this content needs to go to a business owner. And then based off of the messaging and just how I talk in the actual video, it's going to determine what kind of business owner it needs to actually be shown to. So it'll actually target based off of all those little details within the content. And then what you'll end up getting back is just analytics based off of how many times people clicked. So click-through rate, it's going to tell you like how much your clicks cost, like how many people like actually viewed the content in its entirety, how many people actually clicked to go onto your website, how many people actually went through certain parts of your funnel. So like, let's say it's going to measure like who actually just viewed the page and just didn't click on anything, who viewed the page and then watched the video and then clicked on a calendar to actually book a call with you. It's going to measure stuff like that and then start optimizing the ads and who it actually shows to find more people that are similar to the people that dug deeper into the funnel. So overall, that's going to be something that is much more valuable to your business because that's something that organic is just not prioritizing. Organic is basically just prioritizing getting people to view it, while with Meta ads, it's prioritizing getting people to actually click through and like go through your funnels and perform actions that are valuable to your business. And then how this helps you in a short form content sort of aspect is normally when you're creating content in the original way that we were talking about and you're creating like 30 of them, you have to come up with like 30 different ideas in order to make that work. And then you have to come up with 30 new ideas the next month and then 30 new ideas the following month. It's very easy to run out of ideas very quickly, where with the ads, you can really just stick to however many you kind of want, like even like, let's just say 5. You can stick to shooting 5 ads, 5 pieces of short form content, and then which means 5 ideas. That's already going to be a lot less mental bandwidth that you are putting into the actual content. And then when you're actually creating the content and how you can maximize the value of it even more, like let's say this is the actual video. So in videos, it's typically going to have like the hook, it's going to have the meat or the body, and then it's going to have the call to action. So most people, whenever they're creating content, they are just going to treat this as one thing. They are going to film that, and then that's the video. But with ads, to get the most out of your money and your time is you can shoot like, let's say even 5 different versions of the hook, 5 different versions of the meat, and then 5 different versions of the call to action. And then basically whenever you are creating a video, like let's say, for example, this is a video that you post, you end up running it as an ad. For whatever reason, it doesn't perform very well. You can actually just take the video and then re-edit and then just throw in a separate hook. Like one of these 5 hooks that you filmed, if for whatever reason a video is underperforming, then you can just take the second one that you did and then edit that into the video and then remove the first one and then run it again and then see if that actually works better. And that's something that you can't necessarily do in organic content. So, and then same exact thing when, like, let's say maybe you want to switch out the body or the meat of it. Then if you had like a second version or a third version or a fourth version of it, you can basically just remove this and then throw this one into it. And then now you have a new video. And then let's say, for example, the ad actually ends up performing really well. You're going to want to keep running that as an ad, and then eventually you're going to run into what's called creative fatigue. So once you get to creative fatigue, that basically means that people have seen the content too regularly to where they basically know, like, I've seen this before, and it makes them skip faster. So if you were to take the original video and then just switch it out with another one of the other variations that you did, then it can expand the shelf life of the actual content, because when people actually view that piece of content, to them it's going to appear as new, even though it's actually something that they've seen before. But because you switched things around and then ran it as an ad again, like, to them it's going to look like a brand new video, especially if you change the beginning. So following this approach can essentially help you with shooting content less frequently, which means your ideas are going to be much higher quality, and it'll just save you the stress of having to keep up with the organic algorithm. And if you're interested in seeing how I helped a service business owner with being able to upgrade his office space so that he can serve more clients through paid ads, then I would check out this video right here to view the case study.